Hey guys, welcome to this Facebook Live. If atheism is true, then atheists do not exist. We're going to discuss that topic, and I want this discussion to happen with you. So if you're on here and you're watching, please let us know where you're from, and I want you to ask questions in the comments. I'll be monitoring comments on the Genesis Movie Facebook page. Brian will be monitoring comments on the Eric Hovind Facebook page. So if you want to get into the conversation, we invite you to ask your questions as we go through the tenets of atheism and how we draw this conclusion of if atheism is true, then atheists do not exist. I think it's going to be a great discussion today, and I'm really glad you are joining me for it. But first, before we talk about that, if you are someone like my mom who cannot wake up in the morning until she's had her first cup of coffee, then you're going to enjoy supporting, and if you enjoy supporting things that share the gospel, then you're going to fall in love with Third Day Coffee. Because 100% of the profit from Third Day Coffee goes to, that's right, sharing the gospel of Jesus Christ. Third Day Coffee is made from the highest quality Arabica beans. They're purchased at fair market value, and they're roasted when you order. So their order, roast, ship policy guarantees you the freshest coffee, and you can even have it ground to match your own personal preference. I like mine ground for espresso because I get the espresso in the morning, 2 shots of espresso, little half and half espresso, I know, a little bit of half and half, and then I'm good to go. Third Day Coffee supports whyibought.yourcoffee.com. Whyibought.yourcoffee.com has been described as the most creative way there is to share your faith. You simply buy somebody's coffee, you give them a little bitty card that says whyibought.yourcoffee.com. Their curiosity with the pay it forward mentality brings them to a website where it shares your story and the story of every single Christian. We just launched this a few weeks ago. It's already impacted thousands of lives around the world. And just this week, we had a pastor order 1,000 cards, 1,000 of these Why I Bought Your Coffee cards for his church to use in evangelism. So the simple card you give to somebody, and it shares the gospel with them. Every bag of Third Day Coffee comes with a whyibought.yourcoffee.com card, so that whether you're using it for yourself or you're sending that coffee to a friend, you can use it for evangelism. Third Day Coffee right now is offering a gift package of 4 different varieties. These would make great Christmas gifts for your friends. Order by Friday every week. It's roasted over the weekend and shipped out on Monday. Would love to have you check that out. All right, now, if atheism is true, atheists don't exist. How did we come to this conclusion? My friend Brian just recently wrote an article and published it on creationtoday.org. That article spells out in a logical flow that if atheism is true, then atheism doesn't exist. It's called the Tenets of Atheism, the 15 core tenets of Orthodox atheism. Brian, let's talk about this today, and I want to enjoy the discussion. If you've got a question, we want to hear from you. I'm monitoring one page. Brian's monitoring another. So we want to hear from you on if you agree or disagree, and if you have any questions about this as we go through these tenets. Brian, do you have anything you want to set up as we jump into this?
I just want to say good morning to everybody watching. We're going to do our best to respond to your comments there. But if we don't get to your comments or questions while we're filming this live, you can leave comments and we'll check them afterwards. Or you can always send us questions at creationtoday.org, and those come to me. And we will answer them as they arrive as best as we can to help you out, because that's what we're here for.
That is what we're here for. Well, I love this article. You sent it to me a couple weeks ago. As I read through it, I went, wow, I like the logical flow. There's a lot of things in there that many people have never thought of. I oftentimes go from your beginning all the way down to the conclusion, but there's a whole lot more steps in there that you spelled out that I thought were really good, that I thought would make a great discussion for people that are interested in this topic of atheism and agnosticism. And well, what is the difference? It seems like there's been an attempt to redefine what an atheist is. So let's start there. Let's define the terms. If we're going to come to the conclusion that if atheism is true, atheists don't exist, let's define these terms. Can you kick us off with that?
Well, I was going to throw it to you here. When you've talked to a lot more people than I have, and when you talk to someone who calls themselves an atheist, how do they tend to define that term to you when you ask them?
A lot of times they'll say it's an atheist is somebody who does not have enough evidence for the belief in God, or they lack belief in God. So they'll say it's not a positive belief, it's actually a lack of belief. So they try to say that atheism is a lack of belief, because when you put it the other way and say it's a positive, where they say there are no gods and it's a positive claim, then they have to prove that, and they can't do that. Therefore, they back off and just say it's a lack of belief in God.
Right. So that's one of the reasons why I sort of stumbled upon this is based on conversations I had with a lot of people who called themselves atheists. And one of the things I realized is, first of all, that sort of internet definition of what an atheist is has changed. Like, I'm sort of old school, where atheist meant somebody who positively asserted God doesn't exist. But now people are saying, oh no, I'm not asserting a position. I'm saying that I don't have faith in God, and that's it. So first of all, what I always try to do is say, okay, when I'm using this term, here's what I mean. So to me, it's real simple. It's as simple as MythBusters. So can we bring up my flow chart? Because I brought up the flow chart to make it real clear how I'm using these terms.
Yeah, it's on there. They can see it right now.
Okay. Essentially, it's just, do you believe that God does exist? Now, there's two answers to that, either yes or no. And if you say yes, then that's theism, which means you believe God exists. And then we have the conversation, okay, well, who is God? But if you say no, well, okay, you say you don't believe that God does exist. Do you believe that God doesn't exist? And again, it's either yes or no. If it's yes, you do believe God does not exist, that's atheism. If you say no, I don't believe God doesn't exist, that's agnosticism. So to me, those are the only three options. And so when I use the word atheism, this is how I'm using it. Now, I'm acknowledging right off the bat, other people are using it in the way that we just discussed, where they say, well, I'm an atheist, but that doesn't mean I'm asserting God doesn't exist. So just straight off the bat, when I define the word atheist, that's how I'm doing it. Very simply, you have said, no, God does not exist. And so in the article that I wrote, I start off that way. I'm like, let's say just what is it that I'm saying when I call someone an atheist? I'm saying an atheist is an individual who chooses to affirm the statement, there are no gods, as true. Clear enough for everybody there?
That sounds clear to me, and I see what you did there. Atheist, it's from the Latin for no gods, and very simply, an atheist is an individual who chooses to affirm the statement, there are no gods, and they affirm that that is true. So it is,
right.
The technical definition of an atheist is somebody who makes the positive assertion that there are no gods.
Right. So if you use the word differently, don't get mad at me. I'm telling you how I'm using it, and that's how I started this. I'm like, if that's your position, then all right, what does that mean? So that's where this came from. And now, I didn't when I write articles, sometimes I have like a punchline in mind, and I'm like, all right, how do I get there from here? But in this time, I honestly just thought, okay, well, if you start off with the assumption that God does not exist, that there are no gods at all, we live in a purely godless universe. What has to follow from that? What would a consistent atheist have to believe? Because one of the things I'm sure you've seen as well as I do is that people will call themselves an atheist, but then they'll insist that, well, we have to give money to the poor, we have to be honest, and all of these things. And I go, well, it seems like you want a Judeo-Christian morality and a worldview, but without God. I'm like, that doesn't make sense. In fact, I actually just looked this up before we started talking here. Frank Turek has written a book called Stealing from God. And that's the phrase that he uses, that as atheists try to build their worldview so that they have a morality, they tend to steal from the Bible. They steal from the biblical worldview so that there is all these objective truths, objective right and wrong, that kind of stuff. Does that make sense?
It does. Indeed, it does make sense. Absolutely.
So one of the things I tried to do is like, let's just start off with number one, there is no God or gods. What has to logically follow from that? So this is the list I made, just following the logic as it flowed. So starting with number one, the creed that defines the atheist belief system, there is no God or gods. And that, again, is how I'm using the term to make sure we're clear there. So number two, there is no supernatural, including no spirits or afterlife. And the reason why I argue is because no argument could be made against God or gods, which would still allow for the supernatural. It wouldn't make any sense to me to say that, well, God doesn't exist, but there are still angels and demons. There's still an afterlife, that kind of thing. Because if there is not eternal, self-existent God to create angels, where would they come from? Well, they would just be part of the material universe. They would just be a different kind of material, like maybe they're antimatter, or maybe they're dark matter, and these kind of things that physicists keep talking about. But there would be no spiritual, there'd be no supernatural. And that makes sense that would have to logically follow.
And then that obviously leads to the very next thing you're saying there, which is if there's no gods, there's no spiritual realm. If there's no spiritual realm, then matter is all that exists, which is the very next thing you're trying to point out.
Right. So it's called materialism, the belief that there is only the physical universe, which is time, space, matter, and energy. Because again, once you decide there is no supernature, no supernatural, then there's just nature.
Now,
And
do you distinguish between materialism and naturalism, or do you put those as really basically those are kind of the same exact thing?
the way that I would use those terms, they're the same thing in the sense that nature is time, space, matter, energy. It is the what we would call creation, but nature is the lack of creator term that we use in a sort of secular sense. So in my head, materialism and naturalism are the same thing. But as I've said, I'm sure there are people who use the term differently.
No, I would agree. I think they're pretty much the same. I think those are the naturalism says nature is all there is. Materialism says material is all there is. So you have nature and you have material. It's the same thing. It's the natural world. It's the material world is the only thing that exists. Okay.
Right. And so 3 and 4 in my head sort of are saying the same thing in two different ways. So because there is only time, space, matter, energy, there can be no miracles or magic, or because those are things that fall under the supernatural in a sense. So without a miracle worker, without God to do miracles, there are no miracles. And the word magic, I find, doesn't really have a definition. It tends to be just natural science we don't understand. Like if you took your TV and remote control back 200 years, it would seem like magic to some people.
Yeah.
But once they understand it, they'd be like, "Oh, it's just technology." So magic is just technology you don't understand yet. So there is just nature, just technology based on science, chemistry, physics. Um, because in this world, again, with no supernatural, with no miracle worker, there are no miracles. So that just made sense. But here's where the worldview starts to become something a lot of people don't think about. Like a lot of atheists or self-professing atheists will get to this point and say, "Yes, that's my worldview." But once you hit number 5, actually, I just looked at another place where I'd posted this, and I got the comment that said, "Up to number 4, you're good. The rest is garbage." He didn't explain why. He just decided at this point I disagree. But here's what has to logically follow: that once you realize that there is just nature, just matter, time, space, matter, and energy, then everything that ever happens is predetermined by the laws of physics and chemistry. That everything in the universe is controlled by these physical laws, which is the foundation of science. Now, there's like this little wedge of wiggle room you can throw in here that you can just reject all of science, everything we know about physics and chemistry, and say all of that is nonsense, that the universe is chaotic. But I don't find any
an atheist is
do
somebody
that ever.
who's kind of embracing science. They're saying, no, we can trust science, we can't trust religion. So typically they're not going to do that. And this is, though, the big deal. This is kind of the big point that needs to be made is if you follow 1, 2, 3, and 4, naturally, therefore, thus, as you put in the article, determinism. In other words, chemicals just react. When I put what's the baking soda and
vinegar.
And vinegar, thank you. When I put baking soda and vinegar together, it doesn't matter when or where, it's going to react, and it's going to react consistently every time. That's just what happens. So that's a simple chemical reaction example of basically everything that's going on in the universe. And that's what you're claiming here. That's what you're showing here is that if you adopt materialism or naturalism, therefore everything is only material in nature. Therefore, everything is only chemical reactions. It's only science, the laws that, and we could get into that, but the laws have laid down. So yes, things just happen and there's no control over that. Everything is determined. Am I right on kind of how I'm trying to put that?
Yeah, essentially that's it. That when you have a materialistic worldview, the universe becomes sort of an explicable machine where once you understand all the parts, it's just like the example I always give is a toaster. Because a toaster has a certain chemical composition and a certain structure, it does what it does. And that's it. That there's no choices, there's no guesswork. It's just a machine doing what it has to do. And so that would be true of the entire universe. And for the most part, most of us don't really tend to disagree with this. When we look at the orbit of planets around stars, or we look at the path of a comet around the sun, no one says, "Well, what's the comet thinking there? What choices is it making?" We have mathematical equations that describe its path so that we can send a satellite out to rendezvous with it a year later at a place where it's going to be. And that's how the universe runs for a lot, that God created these laws that science is discovering. But as atheists try to take those laws of science and say, well, because we can understand the universe through chemistry and science, that proves there isn't a God. Well, now all you have are those laws and no lawmaker. But now you have only physical laws. You have no supernatural. You have no spirit. You have no soul. Ultimately, you have just, the clockwork, the machinery of the universe, including ourselves, which I get to a step down here. But essentially, number 5, all things are determined and controlled by the laws of physics and chemistry. But what a lot of people don't think about, and again, this is not unique to me, I didn't come up with this idea, I'm just seeing that it logically follows, is that everything since the beginning of time, so if you start off with assuming the Big Bang, that from nothing, everything burst into being, once those laws of physics and chemistry were established, and let's just say, suppose you could go back to the very second day of the universe, after the Big Bang, 13 billion years ago. If you had a computer capable of finding every subatomic particle in the universe, and you could match out their mass and their velocity and all of those factors, and you could follow it forward in time, then this conversation, me talking to you right now wearing this shirt, would be a determined outcome of that first day of the universe. That this had to happen, just like when you knock over that first domino, however far down the line of dominoes you go, you know that domino is going to fall. And if you can do the math to figure out whether they're falling this fast and there's this many dominoes, you can say this domino will fall at exactly this moment, and it will. But that's true of everything on this worldview, not just what is that comet going to do next year, but what are you going to think and feel and do tomorrow? It's already been determined 13 billion years ago on this view, because everything, including you and your brain, are all just machinery following those laws.
And if we could actually understand all the different inputs in your life and all the different inputs in the universe, we could actually figure out what's going to happen in the future as well.
Right. The universe just becomes a row of dominoes toppling over since the beginning and until they run out of dominoes, essentially.
And now I know this doesn't get into kind of the argument that I like to make of the whole if the laws of science that we have today must be universal, immaterial, and unchanging. Therefore, it must have a universal, immaterial, unchanging God in order to start those laws off. But we're just going a logical flow of if what you believe is true, if atheism, therefore,
Right.
therefore, and you end up right now where we're at is determinism. Everything is predetermined from the beginning. All right,
Right.
go ahead.
Let me interject here, because this is a point where a lot of atheists will say, well, I don't believe that. And just because somebody professes atheism doesn't mean they do believe all these things. I'm not saying this is what every atheist does believe. What I'm saying is if they were consistent and relied purely on their starting point of a godless universe, this is what they would believe. But like Frank Turk points out, atheism is unlivable. Nobody can follow all these and say, yes, I accept all this, because it's insane. But it is what follows logically from atheism. So I'm just following the logic where it goes. And once you hit number 4, a lot of atheists are going to jump ship and be like, I'll take the label, but I don't want this religion. And I don't blame them. So
No
this
kidding.
is what
And that is the problem. Especially as we get to these next ones you got here on number 5 and number 6, or excuse me, number 6 and number 7. Once you get here, it's like, well, nobody wants that. Nobody wants to agree with that. No atheist wants to go there. And I like the way you said that. I'll take the label. I just don't want the religion. That's really what they're trying to do. They're trying to have their cake and eat it too. That's for sure.
Yes. So with determinism and with materialism comes number 6. There is no basis for any objective non-physical value. Let me say that again because I started badly. There's no basis for any objective non-physical value. There's just time, matter, space, and energy. You can measure that. You can measure inches or foot-pounds, but that's it. You can just quantify the physical universe. But when an atheist talks about objective reality, objective truth, objective goodness, that justice and mercy are good, and they know that those are good, they have abandoned atheism. And I've had those conversations, as I'm sure you have, where someone who calls themselves an atheist will say, well, I know there's objectively good and bad. I know that cruelty is bad and that kindness is good. I'm like, all right, that's true. And I expect
how do you come up with
that.
How do you determine that? And that's why there's no basis for objective non-physical values is the way you put it here. And it's like, yeah, based on how do you get there? If you've heard it in philosophy, it's often called the ought versus is arguments or dilemma. We can know a lot about what is happening. This is happening. He killed her. That did happen. Now, what atheism cannot do, which is what you're getting at, is why should he not have done that? Because it's just molecules and motions. in motion. It's just the physical universe. You can't say he ought to have done this instead. He ought to have loved instead of killed. Now, by the way, you know where they go with that argument, right? Right away they go, well, we want what's best for society. That doesn't make a better society. And all they're doing is pushing the problem off, just like the origin of life. Well, it might have come from another planet or another universe, or all you're doing is pushing the problem away. Where did it come from to begin with? Why do we have an objective standard of human flourishing is good? You can't get any good versus bad. My body, if atheism is true, is nothing but molecules that the universe happened to form this way. There's no reason it should or should not be this way. Matter of fact, there's no reason we should or shouldn't allow other people to be this way. What if the universe determined me and my molecules to be a murderer of other, you can't even use the word murder. There's no such thing as murder in atheism. What if it caused me to rearrange the molecules that allowed some other thing that is currently those molecules are walking around to no longer be walking around and lay there, I would say lifeless, but you can't even use lifeless if atheism is true. Anyway.
Right. Well, one piece of matter changing another piece of matter, is that good or bad? Like when a rock hits the moon and causes a crater, do we say, oh, what a tragedy? Like, no, it's just matter interacting with other matter according to the laws of physics and chemistry. A murder is just one collection of matter interacting with another collection of matter, following the laws of physics and chemistry. Once you realize the materialism and determinism, it becomes just that dark, which is why a lot of people hit number 4 and be like, no, not to the rest of that. Because again, it's not livable. Everybody knows instinctively through their own experience, this is ridiculous. But again, I'm not saying this is what atheists do believe. I'm saying this is consistent atheism, that if they were consistent with their beliefs, they would have to accept this as true. A lot of them have tried, a lot of philosophers, atheist philosophers over the years have tried to make these arguments, but ultimately everybody knows just through their own experience that it's absurd. But
now, I do want to stop right there and say, hey, if you're watching this and you have a question about this, I mean, we're basically drawing the conclusion that if atheism is true, atheists don't exist. And we're on point number 6 right now. We've got 15 to go through. If you got a question or comment, you agree or disagree, just type that in on your cell phone right there. Just go to the hit comment and say, I agree so far, or I disagree, and give us a point number that you disagree with. We want to talk about that. Or if you have a question, let us know, okay? All right, so Brian, we've gone through the first 6 points. If there are no gods, therefore there's no supernatural, therefore materialism or naturalism, therefore no miracles, no magic, therefore determinism, the molecules just behave the way the molecules behave from the beginning of the universe, therefore there's no value, there's no physical value, everything is just matter, and what matter does to matter doesn't matter. That makes sense?
Perfect.
Okay.
So what that ultimately leads to is once you accept materialism, that's true about yourself, which again, a lot of people don't think about. But once you view the entire universe, you're viewing yourself as part of that. If there is no supernatural, then there is only matter about humanity, that what you are is just chemicals doing what chemicals have to do. And this is why I say there cannot be free will. And again, I've heard atheists declare this. Richard Dawkins has said publicly, no, there is no free will. That's an illusion. So again, I'm not saying that I'm not saying anything that atheists have not said about their own beliefs. But the thing is, if your brain, and on this view, yourself is just the meat computer in your head, if it's just made out of matter and there is no soul, no spirit, it's just chemicals doing what chemicals have to do. No cell in your head knows it's in a brain, and no molecule in those cells know it's in a brain. There is no choice, no thought. It's just chemicals doing what chemicals do. And the fact that they're arranged in the form that we call a human brain doesn't mean that they're magically become something that's different than the laws of physics and chemistry. Everything about you, including your brain, which controls, on this view, everything you think, feel, and do, is just chemistry doing chemistry. It's just the laws of physics. And as I said, is all entirely predetermined. You don't make choices. You are just the falling of dominoes. It's a complex collection of dominoes, but it's just dominoes running into dominoes.
And that's again why people say, if we could know all the sensory inputs and get it all figured out. I mean, Elon Musk just invented, or his team just invented the new implants that are, I think it's 10,000 or 100,000 times smaller than a human hair, 10,000 times smaller than a human hair, that can read and write and can understand exactly what's going on in the brain and the different activities. And they're monitoring this and they're figuring this out. And this is going to help Parkinson's and all this stuff. If you could read and write everything going on and map out everything going on in the brain, you could record that program of what does my brain do when I say lift my hand. You can record that and then write that to somebody else's brain. But that's simply all that's going on. There's no free will, as you say, in order to say, I want to do this, I want to do that. All we are doing is chemically reacting to our environment. That's all that's going on.
Right. Essentially, you start to lose a sense of self. That I mean, we all know it from our experience that our self is a person who makes choices. I think and feel. I decide things, but that's incompatible with the atheistic worldview. There's no materialistic explanation for the ability to make a choice. Like if I have a toaster and I push down the lever, it doesn't decide whether or not it's going to make a Pop-Tart. Like, all right, well, suppose I have a billion toasters together. How many does it take to start making decisions? Well, the question is meaningless. They're all going to do what they have to do because of their design. Atoms are the same way. They don't think, feel, and decide, even in large groups. Molecules don't. Cells don't. And so when you put them in the form of a human brain, the idea that suddenly there's this magical ability to violate the laws of physics and chemistry, that some of the dominoes can jump out of the line and decide not to fall, it doesn't make any sense on this view.
Now,
There
I do want
has
to
to be
bring up
something beyond nature.
I do want to bring up while you're saying that, because I think this is powerful. There's no free will, yet even when it comes to the origin of life from an atheist perspective, where if you've read the textbooks, you know lightning struck the primordial soup and created the first molecule, and it was the amino acids that got together. When we look at what they thought were the simplest living organisms, a bacteria or something like that, even those simplest organisms are reading their environment and responding to their environment. Already we have something that's responding to what's going on. And you have to ask, how did that happen? How was that programmed? I'm getting off a little bit, but just letting you realize we live in a world that is all kinds of sensory, us deciding or determining things based on our environment. Those are not just simply chemical reactions taking place. I do not agree with atheism, but this is where atheism would logically go.
Right. And again, that has to do with ourselves, but not just some part of us, because I think we all kind of agree that there are parts of our brain that control things automatically. Like you're not choosing that your heart will beat right now, that your brain has been designed to make your heart beat at regular intervals to keep you healthy. But there is a part of your mind, yourself, which has the ability to choose. We all know that through experience. It's not something that has to be proven to us. It's something that we know firsthand. But once you accept a materialistic worldview, and that it tends to be the evolutionary worldview and the atheist worldview, that becomes something that you have to reject because it doesn't fit into the worldview. It doesn't fit the model that choice and free will can happen. But once you reject choice and free will because you have a materialistic worldview, that leads us to number 8. Then there can't be any objective right and wrong.
Now, this is big. This is big.
If you cannot choose to think, feel, or do, then you can't choose to think, feel, or do anything else than you do. That you are just a machine doing what it does. Like telling somebody you shouldn't murder, you shouldn't be a racist. That's like saying, hey, my toaster should have decided to toast that differently. It made my Pop-Tart too warm. It didn't decide that. It's just doing what it has to do because of the way it's designed. Well, similarly, our brains, as complex as they are, they're going to do what they have to do on this worldview because they are just a piece of matter. However complex, it's just a machine, it's just a computer. If my computer does something, I don't say, well, why did Windows 10 make that decision? It's programmed to do what it does. It doesn't have any decisions. It's complicated. Like if I looked at the operating system of Windows 10, I wouldn't be able to understand it. It's too complicated. But it's still not making any decisions. It's not thinking, well, how do I feel about this? What's right? It does what it has to. So if your brain is a computer, it does what it's programmed to do because it has to. And so to say this is right, this is wrong, people should do this, they shouldn't do that, there's no justification for saying some things are objectively right or wrong. There's just matter doing what matter does.
Now, I love this point. This is a big point because an atheist will disagree vehemently to you, even though they can't back it up. But the reality is atheism leads to there is no right and wrong. And a great video. I don't know if you ever saw this video. I'm in the Genesis movie Facebook page. I'm going to actually post a link there to a video that I put on our website on creationtoday.org. And it's just, if you go to creationtoday.org/ Cruel, C-R-U-E-L dash logic, L-O-G-I-C, Cruel Logic. You can find that. Kent, I'll send it to you right here. But it's a video where the guy goes through that. If everything is just determined, why should I not therefore kill you? And it's of a serial killer. And he's saying, if this is what I'm predetermined to do, why should I not do it? There cannot be a right and a wrong in a world of just molecules in motion. There cannot be a right and a wrong in a world of molecules that are just in motion. Kent, I G-talked you that link if you want to pull that up. But Brian, I think that's a great video if you guys want to share that on the other pages. And I want to know your thoughts on this, okay? So give me some feedback. Kevin responded, there is no accounting there for anything in the non-physical realm of reality, and you're exactly right. By the way, this entire article that we're talking about is on the homepage of Creation Today, creationtoday.org. I don't have time to watch that Cruel Logic video, but you guys can check that out. So if atheism is true, there is no such thing as right, and there's no such thing as wrong. That's the conclusion, or one of the conclusions.
Right. And let me interject again here, because what I am not saying that someone who calls themselves an atheist is a bad person. This is what a lot of atheists hear when apologists talk about this, is they hear us saying, well, Christians are good people and atheists are bad people. That is not what we're saying. You're not saying that you're incapable of knowing right and wrong. We're saying because you can be good, because you do want to choose good rather than evil, because you know those are real things, that is you rejecting atheism. That atheism would force you to reject right and wrong, but because you don't and you can't reject right and wrong, you know that right and wrong are real things, they're objectively real. You know that some things are good, some things are bad, and we know that whether you call yourself an atheist or not, part of you wants to do what is right and good and wants other people to do what is right and good. That is a rejection of atheism. So it's not a matter of, well, Christians are good people and atheists aren't. I want to make sure that's very clear. That's not the point I'm making.
Great point. Great point.
But the worldview does say that there can't be. Atheism itself says there can't be objective right and wrong. And again, I point out here, with no transcendent moral lawgiver, without God, there can't be an objective moral law by which to distinguish between right and wrong, even if we could choose. So even if you decide we do have some ability to make choices, as some people think free will is an emergent property, that when matter gets complicated enough, we have the ability to make these choices. And so, well, maybe someday computers will be self-aware and they'll be able to choose, which I disagree with. But regardless, if you accept that and say, okay, well, maybe we can make choices, how do we know which choice to make? Where is the objective standard that tells us, well, thou shalt not kill? Well, once you don't have God as the objective, transcendent moral lawgiver to say thou shalt not kill, it becomes a matter of opinion. I feel like you shouldn't kill, but maybe someone else feels like you should kill. How do we determine between those? There's no law of physics and chemistry that says murder is wrong. We can describe murder according to human anatomy, according to physics. We can, follow the trajectory of the bullet as it goes from the murderer to the victim. But you can't say, well, science has shown that murder is wrong. Atheism has, again, no foundation, no justification for saying something is good and something is bad. Making sense?
It makes total sense to me, and I know other people out there that claim atheism are going to want to reject this. Let me just say this. If you're considering atheism, you really need to go look at this article and consider these things. These are the logical conclusions of somebody who's considering atheism. These are the logical conclusions of somebody who's considering atheism. So we're giving you these things in order so you can understand that. Can't go back up to number 9, because we're about to see number 9 here, where there is no justification for even condemning something as right or condemning something as wrong. So if there's no right and wrong, therefore you cannot say something is right or wrong. Therefore, you saying, for example, the Bible is filled with terrible things, bad things. God is a bad God. The very judgment of God as a bad God is not in line with atheism. It doesn't follow from an atheistic worldview. Once again, go through these steps. If atheism is true, there's no supernatural, and you can follow right along through the 1, 2, 3, 4 here. There's no supernatural, therefore materialism, therefore no miracles, therefore determinism, therefore there's no objective standard or non-physical values, therefore no free will, therefore no objective right and wrong, therefore you can't even condemn anything as right or as wrong. It's impossible.
Right. So when your atheist friends are like, well, Christians are a bunch of hypocrites and liars, then I say, well, you're saying that you're describing that, but it seems like you're condemning it. You're saying, well, hypocrisy is bad and that lying is wrong. But if it's true that lying is wrong and hypocrisy is wrong, then there's objective right and wrong. But then you're saying atheism has to be false. So even those generic attacks again show that their worldview is trying to steal from the biblical worldview because they know that that's true. Nobody can live this atheistic worldview, even though this is logically what atheism would force them into. Now, in 9b, I get a little more meddling. I went from preaching to meddling here, where if you don't have a worldview that allows you to say this is objectively right and this is objectively wrong, then there's no objective justification for civil law. We have laws against murder, but why? Because we dislike it, because ultimately it has to be just purely about might deciding what is right. That because the government says this is wrong, well, it's illegal. But illegal and wrong are not synonyms. Ultimately, wrong doesn't mean anything in this worldview. There is illegal. At one point, slavery was legal. Now it's illegal. Did it go from being right to being wrong? Well, on atheism, there is no right and wrong. On the biblical worldview, slavery's always been wrong. The government just needed to create laws to catch up with what the Bible taught. Love your neighbor. Don't own your neighbor. But on the atheistic worldview, on this materialism, matter is just matter. If it's in the form of a human being, that doesn't give it some kind of different value where it should be treated differently. I own my coffee cup. Why should I not own the person next door? Well, if we're made in the image of God and we have that value, and God has told us, love your neighbor, that's why. But if we're just matter doing what the laws of physics demand, there's no reason. So civil laws become meaningless on this worldview. That leads us to number 10. Life has no particular value. Again, life, as we've said a couple of times already, life is a series of complex, admittedly, but just chemicals doing what chemicals do. So every cell is a chemical factory, but all of those chemicals doing what chemicals do are explicable according to the laws of chemistry and physics. It's, again, just a series of simple things in a complex arrangement. If I have a billion toasters, it doesn't become something else. It's just a big arrangement of simple machines. A living thing is just a big arrangement of simple machines. So life is a chemical state that when a organism, plant or animal, is alive, it has a certain particular, it moves against entropy, that it keeps from decomposing, because the natural state of the universe is to break down and decompose, and that's what entropy is. So life is a chemical state. But on this materialistic worldview, if that's all we are, is just matter doing what certain arrangements of matter do, then killing a living thing, even killing another human being, is materially equal to pouring water on a campfire. The chemical reaction that was there stops. It stops doing what it was doing. The chemistry stops doing what it was doing. So life is a more complex series of chemical processes than a campfire, but the fact that something is complex doesn't make it more valuable. That there is ultimately no transcendent origin for value in this worldview. And so life is complex, but if it's just dominoes falling over, where does its value come from? How does life become valuable and murder become wrong? But again, I'm not saying that atheists don't see the value of life. Every atheist knows the value of life. When I believe that anybody who calls himself an atheist will love their children. I've talked to people online. They're like, I've got kids and I love them. I'm like, dude, I don't doubt for a second that you love your kids. I don't doubt that you can call yourself an atheist and be a good father, because you don't live an atheistic fatherhood. You don't say, well, my children, they're just a collection of matter obeying the laws of physics and chemistry. You know that your child has intrinsic value, that they have worth, and you treat them that way. But atheism doesn't account for that. There's nothing in atheism that says that your children have some kind of inherent value and worth and should be treated that way. Whereas, because you know that instinctively, because you know that you should love your children and care for your children, you are rejecting your atheism, and you are borrowing, or as Frank Turk calls it, stealing from the biblical worldview. So again, I want to make sure it's clear. I am not saying that atheists are bad people. They can't be good parents. But what I'm talking about specifically is the philosophy and the religion of atheism itself. So In 10b in my article, I say that emotional appeals to morality are equally empty as emotions are merely a chemical state of the brain. Because a lot of people, once you get past the philosophy, they're like, well, I know that murder is wrong. I see it and I understand it the same way that I know an apple is red when I look at it. I'm like, all right, but if you're saying that murder seems wrong because you can feel that it's bad, you can see the suffering of people that suffer loss and that kind of thing, all you're again describing is just chemistry on a macro level. That whatever chemicals in your brain cause you to feel sad or feel pain, it's just chemistry doing chemistry. And so to say that that somehow shows that murder is bad because you can see people suffering or you can understand the concept of pain, like if I turn off my machine, the screen goes blank. Is that murder? Does that become bad? What if I had a program on my computer that got very sad when I closed Microsoft Word? Should I never close Microsoft Word? That if that's all we are is just computers and machines doing what computers and machines do, you lose the ability to have, again, this normal experience of humanity. That everybody understands that humans are valuable. We see each other as having value, but the only reason that makes sense is because we go back to the Bible, we go to Genesis, where God makes us in his image, and he gives us that transcendent value, where we know we are something different than nature. We're not just matter, we're not just another animal. So in that concept, atheism doesn't allow for the normal human experience of valuing yourself and your children and the people around you. But we all do that, which is why I say that nobody is really an atheist, because when it comes to how do I parent, do I love my kids? Yes. But in doing that, you're rejecting atheism. In number 11, I take this from how do you view other people and what are the sort of applications for it in terms of civilization. And now it's, well, what about you personally? If you are going to say that you are an atheist and you start off with this atheistic worldview, and it logically follows that there has to be materialism, naturalism. What does that say about you personally? There's an old Greek version of this that I don't remember the name of. Somebody can let me know in the comments. But imagine you had the Starship Enterprise from Star Trek. Now imagine over the course of its long, many years of traveling through space and exploring distant planets and new civilizations, that pieces of it break and get replaced. And suppose that, say, over the course of, say, 20 years, that in 20 years, Scotty and the team replace every single part of the Starship Enterprise. Every part of it gets replaced, and the old parts are stuck in a warehouse somewhere at the Federation. Is the ship that they're flying at the end of their 20-year journey, is that still the Starship Enterprise? Because the one that they started with, all of those parts are now somewhere else. And the ship that they're flying on is now made of brand new parts. And the reason why this applies to yourself, because if you think about yourself purely in a materialistic sense, you are a collection of atoms arranged in cells, and your cells are constantly dying and being replaced. Your blood cells are constantly being replaced. Your skin cells, your bone cells, your muscle cells. Over the course of some years, all of your cells will be replaced. To be the same person that I was 10 years ago. As I say in the article here, the collection or arrangement of matter that you are years apart is not even the same given, 10 years, 5 years. You're not even a series of identical copies. You're a series of completely different arrangements. That if you put up a picture of me when I was 5 and what I am now, I look completely different. I have totally different memories and experiences, and I'm made of a completely different arrangement of matter. So where is the self? If I'm just a space that moves through space-time that's constantly a changing collection of matter, where's the idea of the self come from? And of course, we think of ourselves as being a self, but if all we are is matter, it doesn't make sense. It's like going to the grocery store, there's a pile of apples. If you go there 6 months later, you'll see a pile of apples. Is it the same pile? No. It's a different collection of apples entirely in the same place. So is the human body. But if all the human body if all humanity is that collection of atoms and molecules and cells, then you only exist in the moment, and you don't have any kind of transcendent self. You don't have a lifetime. You have a moment, and the next moment, there's a different human because it's a different collection of atoms and molecules and cells. The self becomes an illusion. So again, if I say anything that is absolutely absurd, let me know in the comments. or Eric interrupt me anytime. But otherwise, I'm just going to press on forward here because number 12 here, this is where it starts to get from the physical to the mental then. Perception of a unified self is false. And again, this is something that I have heard atheists talk about. All of this stuff is stuff I've heard atheists talk about, that they profess this. So again, I'm not saying anything here. Nothing in this list is not something that is has been said by atheists. There are atheists on the popular level in books, on YouTube. I have found atheists that have said all of these things as part of their religion, as part of their worldview. And this is one that, again, most people who take this label haven't thought about this, but the perception of a unified self is false. That's not just physically, but who you are in your mind. Because if your mind is just the meat computer in your head, and that's the naturalistic explanation, is that there is no mind outside of your head. It's just your brain. It's just a computer doing what the biochemical parts make it do. Well, then you have a bunch of different parts of your brain. And we know because the brain is still quite a mystery. But a lot of the things that we've studied, we've learned a lot about the brain over the past 100 years. And we know there's a lot of different parts doing different things. But the part where we think about ourselves, we identify ourselves, we are self-aware, and we sort of experience the world. That's just one of the programs running on the meat computer. There's a whole different set of systems running all the rest of it. The idea that you are just a self is kind of like if I get a screen open and it's got YouTube on there, and Chrome showing YouTube says, "I am your entire computer. I am it." I'd go, "No, you're just one of many different windows I have open. You're one of a whole lot of different applications I've got running. There's a whole lot of software. That you're just one component to this." And as a human being on this materialistic worldview, your self-identity, the you that you think of, or the I guess, as you're thinking about yourself, that's all that is that's just one of the pieces of software running on your meat computer. Whereas that differs very, very much from the Judeo-Christian biblical worldview that says that your I, yourself, is the core of what and who you are. That's the sort of image of God, the imago Dei that you're given. When God makes us in his image, he makes us as the only thing in the universe that is able to say I. Dogs don't talk about themselves in the first person. They don't have that sense of self. Rocks don't, trees don't. But we do have that sense of self where I know I am a self. I know I'm a person. I am one person. There's not multiple people in my head. And I'm the same person I was yesterday. I'll be the same person tomorrow. Even though I'll be a little older tomorrow and I have different memories and experiences from what happens today, I am still the same self. But this atheistic materialistic worldview doesn't give you that option.
And that is a huge problem that we have today, which leads to, and I can't wait to get to this conclusion because I love hitting this conclusion when I speak, but there's no actual basis for logic itself. Here you have atheists trying to say, let me lay out for you the logical conclusion that God does not exist. When in reality, atheism itself cannot even account for logical thought. Go into that one.
Right. So often we are told by the popular internet atheists that they are the side of reason. But the thing that I realize is that reason and logical thought requires the ability to make choices, the ability to weigh things and decide, well, this is true and this is not. But if your brain is just a meat computer, it doesn't have the ability to make choices. It's merely following the programming that it has based on your DNA. If the brain is matter, determined by natural laws, as again, determinism, there's just matter, space-time matter energy. If your brain is your mind is predetermined by those natural laws. It can't choose to accept as true or choose to reject as false any information that it processes. Something which is known or believed is just a particular chemical brain state, predetermined by the laws of nature.
Did you say brain instinct?
Yes, brain instinct.
That's good. Instead of instinct, it's a brain instinct?
Yeah, it's just the arrangement that your brain is in, the chemicals. Because again, there's not some kind of supernatural self using the brain the way that I use my computer. It's just the computer.
So really, when you're arguing with somebody, all you're really doing is arguing with their brain instinct. You're just simply, there's no reason to argue now because that person can't help but think the way that they think, and they are determined to think the way they think. So for an atheist to argue against a Christian, for an atheist to argue against a Buddhist or a Muslim or somebody who does believe in God or any religion out there is actually absurd, because they can't, according to atheism, they can't even help what they're thinking.
Right. In order to try to get someone to change their mind, you're already rejecting atheism. Because atheism itself, that belief system, is just the arrangement of the matter inside the atheist's head. It's not because they're smarter or more educated. It's just that happens to be the way that those dominoes fell, that it arranged those molecules in their head in the state that is described as atheism. But that's, again, all it is. It's just an arrangement of matter. So everything they think, feel, and say and do is just an arrangement of matter. So again, we tend to think of information as supernatural because it is supernatural. Information is something beyond just chemicals and space. And it has to be something above that because it's not made out of matter. It doesn't take up space. But when we know things, when we process information, when we think and choose and decide and logically process, we are doing something supernatural. But if all you are is a meat computer, then the arrangement of those molecules and atoms and cells in your head determine what you think and feel and do. And on this worldview, if you could go into somebody's brain and rearrange the physical components, they would think and feel and do differently because of that, and purely because of that.
That's amazing. So you draw a conclusion here on number 14 that is like a wow moment for anybody considering an atheistic worldview, anybody considering there is no God, therefore there's no supernatural, therefore everything's material in nature, therefore everything's determined, therefore there's no right and wrong, there's no self, there's no an I, everything's just molecules in motion, therefore there's no thought, therefore there's no logic, therefore number 14, oh my goodness. You can't know anything if atheism is true.
Nope, it doesn't allow it. As I described, we can merely have a particular arrangement of brain states that we call knowledge or beliefs or certain propositions. But that's not the same thing as actually knowing. There's a lot of information on my hard drive here on my computer, but my computer doesn't know things. It doesn't logically deduce, doesn't decide things. It doesn't choose between what's true and false. It just has a collection, an arrangement of ones and zeros.
Okay, what
if
about
that's all your brain is, you don't know anything.
Hey, what about Watson, that supercomputer? Does it happen to know right and wrong?
Watson, as complex as it is merely following his programming.
Exactly.
Computers cannot question their programming. That's something that we can do that computers will never be able to do, is question their programming.
And that, to me, is the big deal. That is the big deal right there. You look at, if you've ever studied Watson, Watson is this computer program that was designed, literally programmed to go out and search for answers, and then it played Jeopardy. Yes. And I think originally it lost. And so what did the programmers decide? The programmers, the maker of that computer, said, we need to go in and change this. It thinks this word means this. We need to let it know it means this. And they reprogrammed it to be able to go out and find answers and actually try to win a Jeopardy competition, which it did. So very, very incredible. But every single bit of it is pre-programmed.
Right. I mean, that's the thing. It's fascinating science. And again, I love that kind of stuff. I love seeing what programmers and robotics can do. But no robot and no computer and no program is ever going to make choices. The programmer decides what it's going to do. Those programmers decided what Watson would and wouldn't do. And they had goals and said, we're going to try to make it so it can process this way. But Watson didn't make those decisions. It didn't go out in search of information, and it didn't try to learn, and it doesn't care what's true. It can't process truth. It can only do what its programming does. And if that's what your brain is, if that's what your mind is just a meat computer, you can't know anything. You just have a computer that stores things in a certain arrangement, and that's it.
So if atheism is true, we've gone through this entire list. There's no supernatural. Therefore, there's no right and wrong. Therefore, there's no self. Therefore, everything is just molecules in motion. We've gone through this whole list. Therefore, if atheism is true, there's no free will. There is no objective right and wrong. There's no justification for condemning anything. Life then has no value because it's just molecules. Therefore, self is an illusion. You really don't exist. Your body is just some molecules in this universe. There is no unified self. There's no basis for reason, logic, and thought. Therefore, we cannot have knowledge. And if that is true, if we cannot have knowledge, then therefore, number 15, atheists do not exist.
That's what logically follows. Because, again,
logically
as I
follows.
defined it, an atheist is a person. Well, atheism doesn't allow for personhood. Atheists are someone who's decided to believe something. Atheism doesn't allow for free will or choice or belief or even knowledge. You can't be a person who chooses to believe something. You're just a constantly changing arrangement of molecules, which, on any definition of what it means to be a person, a human, or an atheist, means that atheists can't exist on atheism. All you have is a cloud of molecules in a certain arrangement that's constantly changing, and that's it.
Wow.
You have to deny yourself.
Well, I want to know what you guys think about this. If you agree or disagree, let us know in the comments. Brian, I don't know if on your page that you're monitoring, if you've seen any comments come in. On the Genesis movie page, I only have a couple comments here, and Kevin is the one saying, you're right, atheism cannot account for anything outside of the material world. And I think he sounds like he would agree with our basic premise here of following these along. I don't know if you've ever thought about these. I know some of these are a little bit philosophical in nature, but here's why I thought it'd be good to talk about this, and I'm glad Brian wrote the article about this. Again, that article is available at creationtoday.org right now. You can go there on our homepage, and it's the 15 core tenets of atheism, going through these exact thoughts that we just went through. The reason I think this is so important is because of the appeal that atheism has in our world today. Now, I think the appeal is kind of going away. I think most people are recognizing atheists are a whole lot of bark, and they don't have a lot of bite. They don't have a worldview that is livable, that is sustainable. Many of them go there thinking, and I've talked to many atheists like this, they go there thinking, this is where real community is going to be. Finally, I'm going to be accepted. I'm going to be loved. And they get there and they realize, you're just a bunch of selfish people that are all in this for yourself. You're shoving other people down to get notoriety, and you're cheating on your wife and you're cheating on your spouse. Of course, if atheism is true, you got to say there's no problem with that. Those are just molecules in motion, and there's
Right.
no right and there's no wrong, and you find yourself disillusioned with atheism, and for good reason. So if you're considering it, some of you have already gone through that cycle. I'd love for you to let us know in the comments if you've already gone through that cycle, you've considered or called yourself an atheist, and you've gone all the way around and you've gone, you know what, this isn't livable, this isn't tenable, and it's not true. There is a divine lawgiver. There is a supreme being. There is an ultimate programmer, an ultimate designer that created this universe, and you've discovered him. Man, let us know in the comments if that's you, if you've gone through that journey. It's a journey that we pray everybody, if you're considering atheism, goes on, because we can't wait for you to get to the end of that journey. The end of atheism is theism. It really is. The end of atheism is, well, I guess it's either an atheist does not exist, or you realize, wow, all these things are not true, therefore God does exist. And that is the reality.
Yeah, I always sort of take them back to was it Romans chapter 1, where Paul says, look, God has given you everything that you need to know. He's there. You already know. Everybody's without excuse. And when I show people this, I'm like, I don't expect you who call yourself an atheist to believe all these things. I just need you to acknowledge that this is logically what you should accept if you were going to be a consistent atheist. But I know you don't. I know that you love your kids. I know that you know right and wrong. And so you're already rejecting atheism. That's part of what God has put in us, where that's part of his creation, wherein we are without excuse. Because if you are going to really accept atheism, you have to accept all of these things, and nobody does. And that's why that definition for atheism has changed, where people look at this and be like, all right, I can't accept that. Maybe the first four, but the rest is ridiculous. I'm like, yeah, I know you know that. But since you're rejecting that, that means, all right, you've opened the door wide for God. Now go find out who he is. And ultimately, this is why this conversation is worth having, because God loves everybody. And that includes the angry, blasphemous atheists online who hate us for what we do and what we are, and they're, trying to criticize and attack the Bible. God still loves those people, and Jesus died for those people. And what we want is for those people to just look through that open door and see God standing there with his arms open, saying, hey, come home. They are the prodigals, and he's still waiting. And so that's our message here. That's the gospel, that God loves you and Jesus died for your sins. So wherever you are in your journey now, ultimately, if you just pursue the truth, that leads to Jesus.
Amen and amen. Brian, thank you for writing this article. Thank you for spelling out so clearly how a true atheistic worldview leads to the conclusion that we can't know anything, and if we can't know anything, then an atheist doesn't even exist. And everything they do, the way they behave, undermines the very thought process they're trying to go through to claim atheism. You did a great job on the article, man. Thank you very much.
Hey, thanks. It's my pleasure. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to talk about it. And for the people watching at home, if you got questions and comments, you can leave them here at Facebook, or you can send them in at questions@creationtoday.org, and we will get back to you. Wherever you are on your journey, we're here to help you get to know Jesus. So let us know how we can help you.
That's awesome. Well, thank you guys for joining us on this Facebook Live. I know this was a long one, but I think it's an important topic because we do want to help people understand the truth. That should be exactly what everybody really, really wants, is a desire for truth. It is a God-given desire. He gave you your conscience to help you understand the truth, that you're a sinner in need of a Savior. And what Brian said there at the end is so true. You can have a personal relationship with your Creator, God. All you need to do is recognize your sin, like the Bible says, all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. We don't measure up to His standard. Therefore, the perfect judge of all the creation, God, is going to judge us. And when He judges you and He judges me, He will find you and I guilty of breaking His laws. You probably already know that. You do not measure up to God's standards. You don't even measure up to your own standards most of the time. I know I don't, let alone God's standards. Therefore, you're either going to pay the punishment for breaking those standards yourself, or somebody else can pay that for you. I can't pay it for you, though. You'd have to have somebody willing and able, and that is the person of Jesus Christ. We'd love for you to get to know Jesus better. You can get to know Him better by going to, are you ready for this? whyiboughtyourcoffee.com. Even if I haven't purchased your coffee, by the way, if you ever come down here to Pensacola, Florida, I got a great coffee shop right around the corner. I'd love to buy your coffee. Come on down and visit me. Brian, your coffee shop's not close enough, so I don't think that'll work for you. But come down to Florida. That makes more sense. We'll treat you well. You can go to whyiboughtyourcoffee.com or go to creationtoday.org under the About section, How to Be Saved, and read that article by Mark Spence and myself and understand the truth of the beautiful gospel. Guys, thanks for joining us. Have a great